Scrabble mug. Welcome back to the M3 Great Riffs channel. We've got something really special for you today. So I've kind of thought about doing album reviews for kind of a while now, but you know, I've never quite pulled the trigger on that. But I decided today's the day. Actually, before we go any further, put links down in the comments to albums that you want me to review. I'm willing to review like local bands, established bands, just whatever. Any album you want me to review, put it in the comments. But anyway, let's move on. Today we're taking a look at a really special album for me, which is Yes's album, Big Generator. A little background on the band. Yes is a very, very, very iconic progressive rock band that formed in the late 60s in England, in Birmingham, I believe. They're known for releasing quite a few really, really, really iconic progressive rock albums in kind of the early 70s, and as the 70s went on, they kind of lost a little bit of steam. So a number of things transpired, but in the early 80s, they reformed with a brand new lineup that was really slick, really technologically up to date, and stylistically relevant. They brought back a couple people from their past, personnel-wise, but there was this new guy named Trevor Rabin. Trevor Rabin was actually kind of a big deal in South Africa and written some pretty good stuff, and he's kind of an up-and-coming artist at the time. So a little bit after that, they came out with an album called 90125, and it contained a really well-known song called Owner of a Lonely Heart. Owner of a lonely heart, owner of a lonely heart, much better than I. Now at that point in Yes's history, Yes hadn't been kind of like a really mainstream big act in quite a while, so they didn't really know how successful it was gonna be. But 90125 ended up being just a humongous album and just an iconic, just one of the most iconic albums of the early 80s. Of course, this was kind of a surprise to them, so they didn't really totally know what to do. They kind of just toured on it for a really long time. Long story short, it was about 4 years before they came up with their follow-up album. But when they did, we the public got a terrific album called Big Generator. Kind of the reason I'm starting this video series with Big Generator is it's really just a hugely impactful album for me. I could probably think of about 5 to 10 albums that I would identify as being almost flawless. Or at least 5 to 10 albums that, like, there's not a single song on the album that's really just not good. But Big Generator is one of them, and thus we're gonna take a strong start to this series. So I, being the logical kind of guy I am, decided we're just gonna go through it track by track and just kind of like illuminate a couple of salient points. Alright, let's dive right in. First track is called Rhythm of Love. Rhythm of Love starts off with these really cool vocals that just like... It's a cool way to start the album because it's like, when you hear this, you don't know what kind of album this is going to be. Like when the beat and the guitar kind of slam in and like surprise you, it's like, oh, okay, I wasn't expecting that. Like starting the album off with something unexpected, pretty cool move in my book. One way I would say Big Generator in general is kind of a little different than 90125 is it's just really diverse. Like every song takes you to some different place. It's pretty interesting, and right off the bat, Big Generator is pretty exemplative of that. One thing I like to do just for fun is when I'm listening to an old song, especially if it's a song I don't know very well, I like to try to listen to the recording quality and then like guess what year it's from. From basically anything from like mid-60s to kind of mid-80s or so, I can usually get pretty close. I bring that up for one good reason. This album came out in 1987, but really in just every way, the recording quality and the recording mix, just the mix and the techniques and everything involved just sound so good. Not just recording quality wise, but just like stylistically and technique wise, everything on this album just sounds top notch. But yeah, verses sound really great. There's this lead-in bit leading into the chorus that kind of draws on the vocal thing from the beginning of the song, which ties it all together. It's just like a really well composed song. So later on in the song, they do this vocal montage thing where one vocal will go and blend into the other, and it does it 4 times. And it modulates in and out of like a different mode, basically a different key. It just does this super cool thing. Like the whole album is full of these little moments that are just like little nuggets of awesomeness.
And
alright, song numero dos. It's called Big Generator. So you got a whole different kind of like vocal arrangement thing that leads this in, and then it just pounds it with some grindy guitar. Super cool. I kind of want to bring a little bit of a balanced review here. One thing that I have to conclude from listening to this album is like, for a Yes album, there's not that many cool bass guitar moments. Chris Squire, who passed away last year, is a really, really influential, legendary bassist in my life. And like, you know, there's good bass work here and there, but a lot of times it's a little more in the forefront with Yes albums, and that's kind of not so much the case with this one. So that would be sort of one drawback, and I mean, you can listen to it in Big Generator, the actual title track as well. It was an interesting era for Yes, writing-wise. They did some stuff on this album that was almost a little bit what I would term like too overtly poppy. A good example maybe being like lyrically this chorus. It's just kind of like, a little bit, moving to the left, moving to the right. Like, you can think of something better than that. I mean, you have to kind of understand, Yes was the band that wrote, "On the hill we viewed the silence of the valley, called to witness cycles only of the past, and we reach all this with movements in between the said remark. Stand and fight we do consider reminded of an inner pact between us, unseen as we go, and right there, in motion, to fields and debts of honor defending." So I'm not necessarily knocking it too much, but moving to the left, moving to the right. I guess lastly about this song, I would say there's this vocal thing at the end that's just really weird and comes out of nowhere. Flying out the soft machine we offer, all surprise to you. There's almost a little bit of a theme of that on this album, like with the last song. You know, they'll just put this vocal weirdness in there that's like kind of this nice little nugget at the end.
And
alright, song number 3, Shoot High, Aim Low. This song is really like a good example of just changing the pace a little bit in an album. Like, doing that in the right way can just be super cool. The first 2 songs were kind of intense, maybe mid-tempo-ish or whatever, and this song just starts out and it's like really slow and it just builds and it's just really cool. They clean up some of the guitar sounds a little bit, and they'll just, like, the whole thing just has this kind of steady beat that just goes through, and it's just like trucking through the song. One of the cooler things about Shoot High, Aim Low is it has this really interesting idea that I would have loved to have been the person to come up with. Lyrically, since they have 2 lead singers on this album, one guy, Trevor Rabin, is like telling one story, and John Anderson, the other singer, is like telling this whole other completely unrelated story right after that. So what they'll do is they'll like tell one stanza of one story and then a stanza of the other one, and just keep going back and forth, and it's just an interesting idea. And what's happening lyrically is like Trevor's singing about this romantic thing or something, like little bits and pieces of this story, and then John Anderson is writing about this like intergalactic, like existential alien destruction battle or something. And what's crazy about it is that somehow works in this song. Like, that's one of the things that I love in music, well, specifically love about Yes, they'll just try stuff and then just like refine the crap out of it and like somehow make it work. Like when I'm writing music, sometimes I'll do that, and like sometimes I'll just get like an idea that just seems like it would never fit, but I just try it anyway. And like sometimes you find pretty interesting ways to make things fit, and it just expands the concept of the song in a really interesting way. I think it's after the first chorus there's this like little bit that you almost can't even tell what it is. But what it is it's like an acoustic lead line that they played, and then they played an electric lead line that's the exact same thing behind it, and they just mixed it perfectly so that it sounds, I don't know, I don't even know if they're trying to make it sound like some new instrument or something, but it just sounds super cool. I think one of the things behind Big Generator that I personally really want to emphasize is like it's a very different kind of an album than 90125, which, you know, I've kind of read reviews and stuff that try to act like it's just this part 2 of 90125 when it just really isn't. Shoot High, Aim Low as a track is a good example because there's just nothing quite that atmospheric and just well orchestrated on 90125. Like, this album is much more that way, I think. Shoot High, Aim Low ends with this really cool guitar phrase that just kind of repeats in a syncopated sort of a way. And it's just like one of those things, like sometimes you'll have a whole song and it just feels like it needs one more thing. And that, like that guitar lead line at the end is just a real good example. It's just like one more little treat for this song to kind of end it.
And
song numero cuatro. Almost Like Love. So for the first 3 songs on this album, they all kind of have varying degrees and interpretations of kind of a dramatic feel. And like for this one, they almost kind of lighten it up a little bit. Big Generator is like a pretty diverse feel album, but like the magic of it is that it kind of like makes sense together somehow. Almost Like Love kind of demonstrates this really well. It's like almost like rock and roll church music or something. Like it's not really a song that's actually silly or ridiculous or even meant to be humorous. It's just like in some weird way lighter, but like not so light and humorous feeling that it just doesn't fit in the album. It was really like a weird balancing act tone-wise with this song. But it's an interesting track. Like John Anderson does these really fast vocals during the verses, and it's almost like he listened to rap or something, but he didn't rap, he just decided to sing really fast. But you know, it transitions from Shoot High, Aim Low, which is atmospheric and heavy and epic feeling, and like this song's kind of silly and it somehow works. It's just a great way to sort of round out this album a little bit, put a little diversity in there. Number 5, Love Will Find a Way. So the way a lot of people think about Yes now is like that they were kind of this experimental band and like really pioneers of audio recording and a lot of progressive stuff in music. But what people kind of forget in the history of humanity is that there was a time when Yes was a band that had hits. And Love Will Find a Way was like kind of one of those sort of songs. I don't think it was super successful as a chart-topping hit or anything, but it was more poppy in its approach. If I remember correctly, Love Will Find a Way was written by Trevor Rabin for Stevie Nicks. Or maybe he wrote it like in anticipation of selling it / collaborating with Stevie Nicks on it, but he just liked it so much that we put it on this Yes album, I guess. This song is really a good demonstration of like Yes could write really poppy music that was still like pretty interesting musically and didn't seem like they were just going for money. In a way, it kind of goes back to like the Beatles. You know, back in the 60s, writing a song that was intended to be popular was not like really something that was frowned upon, or there wasn't disdain for like music that was popular. Even as big as the Beatles were, like people kind of get this skewed impression. It wasn't like that they were just mainstream. It's more like the Beatles kind of dominated what was sort of an alternative form of music. So in a way, that's kind of like the approach to poppy music that you feel like Yes had. Like, it wasn't this crime to write something poppy, because it's just like, that's what they grew up with, like just poppy music that was still good and interesting.
And
number 6, Final Eyes. Not Finalize. I know I said at the beginning that this is like one of those albums that there isn't really a weak track, but I would say the closest it comes for me personally is this song, Final Eyes. It's almost like all the individual parts of this song are pretty decent ideas. I mean, of varying levels of quality, but together it just doesn't feel like they quite make it work. Maybe that's like the eternal curse of being kind of an experimental band. If you're like always trying to do new and creative stuff, just sometimes that's not gonna work out that well. To me, Final Eyes, maybe what it is like when a band that's just really good at writing music, this is what it sounds like when they have a misstep. So to me, that's a good way to sum up Final Eyes. I will say there's this bit at the end that almost makes the whole thing worth it. That brings us to our next song, number 7, I'm Running. If Final Eyes was an example of a song that the mishmash of ideas didn't quite work, I'm Running, it's an example of where like putting really different ideas together, sometimes you can actually make that work. I think a good way to summarize what was mixed together in this song, it's like mixing Tool with like flamenco music. Like, I'm not even joking. Like, if Tool had maybe formed somewhere in the early 80s, some of these parts would be kind of like what they would sound like. And then like the choruses and stuff will be in this really like ska slash flamenco style. And it's just one of those things that if you're writing it on paper, it just sounds like it's just not gonna work. But this is kind of the magic of Yes. Somehow they make this song not sound completely absurd. God, it's just such a weird song. What a crazy song. So all that being said, this brings us to our last track for this album. Number 8, Holy Lamb. This is just one of those songs that has to just be way up there for me. Like, this is just an incredible song. What Yes's song Holy Lamb is like an exercise in is just building up a song slowly and then just having this epic payoff. This whole album has just been like a bunch of diverse and strange styles that are like stitched together somehow, and for the most part just feel pretty cohesive somehow. And the way they chose to end this really interesting album is with a song that has the same 4 chords playing the entire time. Vocally, Jon Anderson starts out at a low register, and like he's kind of singing a similar melody each time, but he just moves it up a couple intervals. Like if you stacked all of the verses on top of each other, they would be doing harmonies of each other. Like it's an interesting idea. But the effect this has is it just gives it goes with that building thing. It's like they put so much thought into the way they ended this really cool album. It's like this whole album just has a really diverse thing, and then they realized this whole album has a diverse feeling to it. So like, to really be diverse, at some point you have to just like be really straightforward. Just a really great track. I'm a huge fan.
And
so anyway, that's my little summary slash review of Big Generator. Just one of those albums that like, if you record something like this at some point, you've really done something. So yeah, like in the bedrock of my writing style and my stylistic development as a musician and songwriter, like this is just one of the foundation stones there. So tell me what you think. Like I said, you can put other albums and list other things for me to review down in the comments. Tell me what you think about this, and yeah, I appreciate you checking this out. Don't forget to hit that like button, mash the crap out of it, subscribe the crap out of my channel, and thanks for viewing. This has been an M3 production. Peace out, guys.